Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A Canadian veteran and former Paralympic champion asked for a wheelchair ramp, but instead was offered medical assistance in dying. Montreal Canadiens goalie Carey Price, who's an avid hunter, is the latest to weigh in on the potential changes to the gun ban bill C-21. And a number of recipients in Lethbridge were honored to receive a special award known as the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A veteran and former Paralympic champion told a parliamentary committee that Veterans Affairs Canada offered her MAID, or medical assistance in dying. Retired Corporal Christine Gauthier, who has been trying to get a wheelchair ramp installed in her home for 5 years, says a caseworker told her that they could give her medical assistance in dying instead, and even offering to supply the MAID equipment for her. Gauthier says she was shocked and in despair. The Veterans Affairs Minister confirmed that at least 4 other veterans were also offered the same thing. Glenn Miller is a veteran and co-chair of public relations with the Royal Canadian Legion here in Lethbridge. He says he too is shocked the MAID was offered as a first and not as a last resort for our veterans.
Well, as a veteran personally, I think that it seems to be becoming more of a trend. Personally, I think that should be the last course of resort based on each individual's complex needs, and it shouldn't be offered at the beginning of the discussion if that was the case. Well, it should certainly be. It is a tool in a toolbox, but it certainly should be only be used by a specialist in that sense. Only at the right place, right time. And I like to think that all veterans are being treated equally right from the get-go, and be given the wide set of tools available to always solve their issues at the lowest resolution possible.
You can include Montreal Canadiens goaltender Carey Price as someone who is not happy with the proposed changes to the Trudeau Liberals' gun ban bill C-21, which would potentially include hunting rifles such as shotguns. Price, who's an avid hunter, took aim at the Prime Minister on his Instagram account saying, quote, "I love my family, I love my country, and I care for my neighbor. I am not a criminal or a threat to society. What Justin Trudeau is trying to do is unjust. I support the CCFR, or Canada's leading firearms rights organization, to keep my hunting tools. Thank you for listening to my opinion." If passed, Bill C-21 would tighten legal access to handguns and refine the definition of prohibited assault-style firearms, which would potentially include shotguns that hunters, including Carey Price, uses. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the Conservatives are working with gun lobby groups spreading misinformation when it comes to the proposed changes to Bill C-21.
To use fear to sow division by trying to mislead Canadians, when the reality is we are stepping up by freezing the market on handguns across the country, meaning there will be no more handguns in this country, while we will always respect the rights of law-abiding hunters and farmers to use shotguns and rifles. There are certain guns that have no place in our communities, no place anywhere in Canada.
Medicine Conservative MP Glenn Motz explains how he sees the amendment to the gun ban bill and how it will potentially impact farmers and ranchers.
But what this legislation does is it targets people that aren't the problem in this country. We've been saying this all along. It targets, the Grandpa Joes who are teaching and passing on a legacy of hunting and sport shooting and those sort of things to their families, to generation after generation after generation. And it misses the mark completely. We have no ability with this legislation to limit what criminals do.
MP Motz will also give us his thoughts on the recently wrapped public inquiry into the Emergencies Act. Watch for that full interview coming up after Business News. A surge in patients at the Alberta Children's Hospital in Calgary has prompted the province to redeploy staff from a facility that helps dying children. Alberta Health Services says it was necessary with respiratory viruses surging in the community. The Children's Hospital is seeing high volumes of acutely ill patients, and as a result, AHS had to pause respite admissions at Rotary Flames House in order to redeploy staff to the hospital. AHS says with all other services at Rotary Flames House, including palliative and end-of-life care, they will continue but will temporarily be relocated at the Alberta Children's Hospital. The province announced that it has reached a new 4-year, $750 million agreement with the Alberta Medical Association. Some of the highlights of the deal include a guaranteed increase of 4% over 4 years, $260 million over that time frame for communities and specialties facing recruitment and retention issues. Government officials say there will also be a $40 million lump sum increases for primary care networks over the first couple of years to provide support while helping to modernize Alberta's primary healthcare system. The province's extra funding will also be given to physicians, along with a bigger focus on rural physician recruitment. Family medicine overall will increase by 8% over the next few years. WestJet plans to begin offering flights to Japan this spring, marking the airline's first nonstop flights to Asia from Calgary. The Calgary-based airline says it will fly into Tokyo's Narita Airport from Calgary this spring. The nonstop flights will operate 3 times weekly beginning on April the 30th. The airline also announced new routes from Calgary to Barcelona and Edinburgh. Also increased frequency to London, Dublin, Rome, and Paris beginning next spring. The Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal was awarded to 15 lucky recipients on Friday evening. The medal honors those who have committed countless hours to serve and help make our community an amazing place to live. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains now, Alberta's Deputy Premier and Infrastructure Minister Nathan Neudorf was on hand to present medals to 15 lucky individuals.
Every seat at the Vimy Ridge Armory was filled with family, friends, and colleagues as the 15 recipients of the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal were presented with the award during the ceremony. Nathan Neudorf, Alberta's Deputy Premier and Infrastructure Minister, presented each winner with a medal. He says every single recipient is deserving of the award for their dedication in making our city a better place.
That's what makes it so such an honor to represent them, such an honor to do events for them. And even now they're saying, I don't know if I deserve this medal. They do deserve this medal because they just give and then they give and then they give some more.
Glenn Miller was one of the winners and is a man with many titles here in our city. He's donated countless hours of his time volunteering in our community, including important roles in ensuring veterans with unmarked graves get a military marker through the Last Post Fund. Miller has also worked with the Lethbridge Military Museum and was vital in ensuring veterans receive a banner honoring their service through the Lethbridge Saluter Veterans Banner Project. He says he's humbled by the award.
Nowadays, with not-for-profit groups, they're very important to a community, but less and less people are volunteering. So it's very important to have a successful community. You need to be able to volunteer in some capacity. There's nothing more precious than a person's time.
The Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal will be given out to 7,000 worthy Albertans, and medal ceremonies here in our province will wrap up by February 5th of 2023. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Deputy Premier Nathan Neudorf was also asked why the UCP wants the NDP to apologize regarding comments they made on the proposed Alberta Sovereignty within the United Canada Act. NDP leader Rachel Notley called for the federal government to quash the act should it pass in the legislature. Neudorf said his party is demanding an official apology from the official opposition leader.
She realized right away after what she said, she tried to retract all those statements, but the fact remains that the provinces are a separate jurisdiction level of government within Canada, and to say that the federal government should just override that authority, that is the least democratic thing that anybody wanting to be leader of a province could say. It's shocking and disappointing, which is once she realized what she said, why she was trying to retract it. We think she should apologize.
Now, Alberta Premier Daniel Smith recently walked back comments she made on language that is presented on the proposed Alberta Sovereignty Act. The act would give the Alberta government more power in the face of federal laws they believe are overreaching. The NDP's economic development critic Darren Billis says they would not support changes to the amendment by Smith.
This bill is toxic for our reputation and for investment. It's put a chill on investment months ago when Danielle Smith first started musing about the Sovereignty Act. Regardless of the size or number of amendments that the government tries to bring in, this bill cannot fix the damage that's been done to Alberta's reputation. The only way to restore our reputation is to kill this bill. Investors need to know that there aren't two sets of government with two different laws and two different ways of doing business.
Bill says groups like the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers have also voiced concerns over the proposed Sovereignty Act. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was meeting with union leaders in Calgary recently, and he too took aim at Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's Sovereignty Act. He says it's both undemocratic and an unwelcome distraction for many here in our province.
The Sovereignty Act does nothing to respond to those major concerns of Albertans. It shows that the Premier is not connected to what people are actually going through. That's a major concern. And I think something that people are worried about when the Premier is ignoring the major threats that people are faced with, the real worries in their lives, and puts forward something that does nothing to fix them. That's one concern. The second major concern, the more we look at the Sovereignty Act, it is a law that is undemocratic. It takes away the powers of legislature and the public to see what's going on in terms of laws, and gives too much power to the Premier and to Cabinet to make laws in secret. And that's very undemocratic. And that's always a threat to the stability of the economy, for people, for the public to have a say in what goes on and to know what's going on, and to have that healthy debate around whether a law is going to help or hurt people.
According to Benita Peterson, who is the event coordinator for a counter-protest over the weekend in Edmonton, there are about 30 people on site to oppose the Alberta Sovereignty Act. But from her side, which supports the Sovereignty Act, there were more than 75 people who attended. Peterson says one of the organizers of the protest used video of them to mislead people into how many people attended, supporting his particular narrative.
So it appears Haroom Ali posted a picture of the protest, and he made it sound like the people in the picture were there to support his event. The irony is that the photo he posted was actually the counter protesters. But because he took the photo from the back side and you couldn't see the signs, it was, I guess, easy to mislead people. So I've attempted to chat with Haroom Ali and have him correct the information, because my preference would be that he's not misleading the public, and he hasn't yet responded.
Now, Peterson adds that there were a number of interactions between the for-sovereignty and anti-sovereignty group members that were positive and informative. Well, it looked like a snow globe at times today in Lethbridge. Angela Stewart is out in the field with an early peek at the forecast. Angela, how long should we expect the flurries to stick around?
Yeah, that snow is expected in our region till about Tuesday, where 2 to 4 centimeters is expected to fall. Come Wednesday, though, sunnier conditions and warmer temperatures are on tap, so that is good news. As for tonight, expect a low of -20 with that wind chill -17 this evening. The wind chill even chillier overnight, -31. As for how the rest of the week is looking, I'll have all those details coming up later in the show.
Looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Angela. There's a new report out which says that Iran hired assassins to target those who've been criticizing the Iranian regime lately. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says that includes critics of the regime who live in both Canada and the United States.
You know, how pathetic are we here in the West, where a story comes out in the Washington Post describing our vulnerabilities against a tyrannical terrorist regime? Do we not have the enforcements in place? Because, you know, the experts that are quoted in the piece talk about how this is imminent. We know they will eventually get through on cases, and they have in the past as well. But we're talking about this time around as the Iranians are entering the third month of protests. And a lot of dissidents across the world, particularly in Canada and the United States, where a lot of expats live, are being very vocal and speaking out and petitioning local and federal governments to do something about the Iran regime. So, of course, they have targets on all of us.
Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will also have the latest on potential peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. She'll have details coming up in the second half of our program. Well, call it a mini Canadian Rockefeller Centre, if you will. In addition to Festival Square's Christmas tree, the outdoor area will soon feature an outdoor skating rink for locals to skate on this holiday season. Installation of the rink began today and will be ready to go as early as Friday. An official with the downtown BRZ says it will be a real ice rink, not artificial, and explains the decision behind building one there.
There's been demand from the community for sure to see an ice rink in downtown, whether it's Galt Gardens or wherever, and the Festival Square space was just the perfect opportunity for us to set up. It's we've seen a decrease in events, obviously, with the cold weather, so this is a great opportunity to try this out this year. If we see the uptake and the community using it and stuff, we can expect it hopefully again next year.
And wait to dust off my skates. Once the rink is ready to go, it will be open daily from 9 a.m. till 11 p.m. $10,000 has been given to the University of Lethbridge to support the Pronghorns golf team. The donation, which will help support the program, will also go towards helping the team travel south of the border for tournaments.
We hear all the time throughout the season about other teams being able to go and experience that. And for us being, the U of L, Little Lethbridge, Southern Alberta, being able to go and experience that level of golf is going to exceed our expectations completely. I think it's just huge for us, especially like speaking for the women's golf team. We don't have that many girls on the team. We're slowly building our team members, which is wonderful. But just being able to bring recognition to the game of golf and to the U of L is nothing we could have ever asked for.
Head coach of the golf team, Marcus Meneghetti, says a lot of the program's funding happens internally, so this donation is a great way to help them expand their program.
We've definitely had some big contributions in the past, but nothing like this, and we're really excited for the opportunities it's going to give us. Golf's an expensive sport, even when you're competing at the university level, so this is going to really help us grow.
The donation was given by Paradise Canyon and the team of Ron Sakamoto, Matt Barkway, and Jay Maygard. A very special note to pass along to you today as viewers of Bridge City News. As you know, our CEO, Leon Fontaine, has passed away from cancer on November the 20th. A celebration of life service will be airing on Miracle Channel this Wednesday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time or 2 p.m. Central Time from Winnipeg. Please tune in if you can. Well, it was a snowy start to the work and school week here in southwestern Alberta, and more of the white stuff is on the way. A full look at the weather picture is on deck. Well, it was a snowy start to our work week here in southwestern Alberta, and more of the white stuff is on the way for the short term. Angela Stewart is out in the field braving the elements once again. Angela, we may be seeing more snow before things start to warm up by, the middle of the week?
Yeah, Hal, we can expect to see more of that snow this week before it will taper off Tuesday evening, and conditions are expected to improve on Wednesday with more sunshine over our region for a majority of the week. Minus 19 for the high tomorrow with that snow sticking around, warming up to 2 degrees on Wednesday with sunshine. The same picture for Thursday, 2 degrees and sunny skies. Friday warming up to a high of 1 with more sunshine for our region. Saturday minus 4 the high and a mix of sun and cloud. Minus 10 the high on Sunday and a 30% chance of snow. The average high for this time of year is 0 with the average low at minus 10. So we are well below our average high but above our average low. Back on this day in 1939, we reached our highest temperature, which was 18 degrees. Our lowest temperature was minus 34 back in 1977. The sun rose at 8:12 this morning and it set at 4:32, giving us exactly 8 hours and 20 minutes of daylight. Temperatures across the country now for Tuesday, periods of snow or rain for the coast. Victoria, a high of 4 degrees tomorrow. There is a risk of freezing rain for the morning. A high of 3 degrees is expected for Vancouver with periods of rain or snow. Minus 23 and sunny skies for Edmonton. The wind chill at minus 36 in the morning, warming up slightly to minus 28 in the afternoon. There is a risk of frostbite. Minus 19 the expected high in Calgary for tomorrow. A chance of snow as well. There is a risk of frostbite with the wind chill near minus 31. Sunny conditions for Saskatoon with the expected high at minus 24, the wind chill near minus 40 in the afternoon. Frostbite can happen within minutes there, so multiple layers is best if you do have to be outside tomorrow. Minus 19 in Regina with a chance of snow, the wind chill at minus 31 in the afternoon. Snow and minus 19 in Winnipeg, around 2 to 4 centimeters of snow is expected. 6 degrees the expected high in Toronto with periods of rain. Ottawa 5 degrees for the high and periods of rain for Tuesday. There's wet conditions as well in Montreal. 6 degrees the expected high. Cloudy skies in Fredericton, +7 for the high. Shaping up nicely, though, in Halifax there. 6 degrees and mainly sunny expected. Mainly sunny conditions in Charlottetown, 5 degrees for the high. And expect periods of rain throughout St. John's tomorrow. And that's a look at your full forecast from City Hall here in Lethbridge.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Canada's latest food price report predicts grocery costs will increase by as much as 7% in 2023. It says that will increase the annual cost of groceries for the average family of 4 by $1,000 next year to more than $1,600. The report also said food inflation will remain high for the first half of next year before easing. Vegetables are expected to see the biggest price increase as drought conditions in the United States have reduced supply, while a weaker Canadian dollar is making imports more expensive. The OPEC oil cartel and allied producers, including Russia, are not changing their targets for shipping oil to the global economy. The decision came over the weekend after the cartel slashed production by 2 million barrels a day last month. The move was aimed at propping up the price of oil, which has been trading lower on fears that a slowing economy will reduce demand. A European boycott of most Russian oil and a price cap of $60 per barrel on Russian exports by the EU and the G7 took effect on Monday. The outgoing CEO of Enbridge does not think Canada will reach peak oil production within the next 20 years. Al Monaco says the energy transition is underway. He does say, however, that Russia's war in Ukraine has shown that the world must continue to invest in fossil fuels or risk jeopardizing energy security. Monaco is set to retire from Calgary-based Enbridge on January the 1st, following 10 years at the helm of the pipeline giant. Under his tenure, the company has invested in wind, solar, hydrogen, and liquefied natural gas. Now here's a bit of a look ahead of what you can expect in business news this week. Stats Canada will release its international merchandise trade figures for October on Tuesday. Canada's merchandise trade surplus was $1.1 billion in September as growth in exports boosted by wheat and crude oil outpaced a rise in imports. The Bank of Canada will make its final scheduled interest rate announcement for the year on Wednesday. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 243 points on the day to finish at 20,242. The Dow was down 482 points to 33,947. The S&P 500 was down 72 on the day to 3998, and the Nasdaq was down 221 points to 11,239. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 305 to 76.93 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 70 cents to $5.58 US. Gold was even on the day at $17.6868 US an ounce, and silver was also even at $22.26 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.41 per bushel, barley's at $9.69, canola's at $19.45, and corn is at $11.43 per bushel. Live cattle were down 13 cents to $153.23. Feeder cattle January contract was up $1.33 to $183.78, and lean hogs were down 35 cents to $82.08. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.58 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the province announced that it has reached a new 4-year, $750 million agreement with the Alberta Medical Association. Some of the highlights of the agreement include a guaranteed increase of 4% over 4 years, $260 million over 4 years for communities and specialties facing recruitment and retention issues. There will also be more funding for physicians and a bigger focus on rural physician recruitment. Family medicine overall will also increase by 8% over the next few years. The war in Ukraine is now in its 10th month. Coming up shortly, our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will discuss the potential of peace talks involving Russia's Vladimir Putin and Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. The Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization is looking for volunteers to take part in their Drive Happiness program. This program is to help seniors in our community who are facing extreme loneliness due to lack of accessible transportation. Volunteers drive clients to their medical appointments, pick up groceries, and take them to important life activities. If you're interested in this opportunity and for more information, visit lethseniors.com/volunteer drivers. Do you have a heart to serve our community? Streets Alive Mission is looking for volunteers to help make sandwiches, sort incoming donations, assist with Foot Friday, and many other opportunities to serve, receive training, and to provide support for this important cause of bringing hope to the hopeless. Visit streetsalive.ca to fill out their volunteer application or call 403-320-1159. And that's today's Bridge City News community calendar.
There's a report from the Washington Post that Iran hired assassins to target critics of the regime living abroad, along with planning more attacks on Israeli, European, and American citizens. Now, to talk about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, who joins us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, this literally sounds like something from a Hollywood movie script.
Yeah, and you know what? We know it's true because it's happened before, right? I know dissidents in Canada that have been targeted for speaking out against the Iran regime, whether they be activists or journalists. Also in the United States, we have a case, several cases, but one prominent one where a woman is now living in an FBI safe house because of the targets on her directly from the Iran regime. There was a plot to kidnap her and take her to Venezuela, etc. It's a long story, but the point being, you know, how pathetic are we here in the West where a story comes out in the Washington Post describing our vulnerabilities against a tyrannical terrorist regime? Do we not have the enforcements in place? Because, you know, the experts that are quoted in the piece talk about how this is imminent. We know they will eventually get through on cases, and they have in the past as well. But we're talking about this time around as the Iranians are entering the third month of protests. And a lot of dissidents across the world, particularly in Canada and the United States, where a lot of expats live, are being very vocal and speaking out and petitioning local and federal governments to do something about the Iran regime. So, of course, they have targets on all of us that are covering this, that are speaking out about this. And this report is very unfortunate. And again, how we knew this to be true, but to see it in writing, to see it officially published in a very well recognized paper, it's something else. So of course, this is a wake up call to to law enforcement, local and more broadly, to keep an eye on dissidents, to keep an eye on threats, to take threats more seriously when they come through, to take hacking and other types of risks more seriously, because eventually this is what they want. They want access. They want to intimidate us. They want to silence us in order to not have these stories be told.
Lisa, there was also another report, this one from the Tasnim agency, that Iran executed 4 for allegedly spying for Israel.
Yeah, so during this round of protests and before, remember this, for the last 43 years, this regime came into power and called the United States the big Satan and Israel the small Satan, which it has more access to regionally. So anytime they wanted to arrest people on trumped up charges, we would hear often that they would be convicted for spying for Israel. And in this case, in the last 3 months, of course, we have a lot of focus on Iran because of the protests. These 4 individuals were arrested, and then these bogus charges of spying for Israel were slapped on them, and then they were allegedly executed over the weekend. So very, very unfortunate. Again, where is the UN? Where is the mainstream media? Where are, the powers that be, the European Parliament, the United States, Canada? They want to see more support from these countries.
TikTok accounts being run by the propaganda arm of the Chinese government have apparently accumulated millions of followers, and many of these videos have been very critical of the United States and its politicians.
Right, not just any politicians. These are all Republicans. So these are accounts that got many followers, and of course, who's surprised that the Chinese who own TikTok are now using TikTok to their own political benefits? It makes perfect sense, and these are why we were warned about TikTok and what it could potentially do by gaining this type of access and viewership around the world. So they use these accounts to gain followers, and then they put up videos about politicians like Greg Abbott of Texas or Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio, prominent Republicans who have a lot of influence in the base. And of course, they're using these platforms to put all kinds of messages to young people. You have to look at the results here, right? What kind of damage is this doing to the psyche of young voters? And it's not just about politics. I'm sure it's about other very dangerous subjects as well. So this is where the influence is at. This is what parents know their children are watching. And again, not just about politics, about many other topics that should have more viewer and parental discretion.
When Trump was president, wasn't there a push to eliminate or even kind of limit the influence of TikTok in the United States?
Yes, which upset a lot of young people more because they rely on TikTok, whether it's a monetization of their platform or because they just are addicted to it, just like many other social media platforms. But it's a time sucker. People stay on there for hours. They love it. They rely on it. And President Trump said there's much more to this. It's a dangerous platform. It's owned by the Chinese. We won't know, and we won't have access to our own information. We won't know what they're doing with that information and that access. And here we go. This is a very, I should say, small and benign example of what they can be capable of doing with that platform and that kind of influence.
Now, Lisa, still with China, the former vice president of EcoHealth Alliance, Dr. Andrew Huff, says he worked very closely with the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China and says he knows for a fact that COVID-19 was genetically engineered and then leaked.
Ding, ding, ding. I mean, it's shocking to see this allowed, right, and not be blocked as misinformation the way it was for the last 2.5 years on social media. No one's surprised, but I am surprised at one thing. When President Biden had a chance to sit down with the Chinese president just a couple of weeks ago, they had a 3.5-hour meeting when none of this was brought up. No questions about COVID, no questions about its origin, no questions about the Chinese crackdowns on its own people who are now on the streets protesting their government because of their COVID policies. None of that was brought up. The only thing we got as a takeaway with the White House notes was that there will not be an invasion of Taiwan by China, which we have no guarantee that's even a fact. But the more important thing here, Hal, is that for the last couple of years, I should say, so many people tried to get some real transparency on this, to question it, to come up with, why. And politicians in the United States blocked these questions because they didn't want this to be blamed on China, the Chinese government, or any narrative that would place the blame on anything but Donald Trump and the way that this was run. So whether it was Fauci or Biden or Pelosi or Schumer or any of them, all these influential figures tried to really suppress this question, really suppress this topic, and here you go. But what are we going to do about it? Now COVID is like the common cold. We have to accept it. So many lives were senselessly lost, and we all know people who died because of COVID. And again, no accountability here, no transparency. And of course, the story gets told in this way, buried in a small headline. And we're glad to bring it to you at the Foreign Desk. And Hal, I thank you for bringing it up as well.
Absolutely, Lisa. Okay, let's shift our focus now to what's happening in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is now in its 10th month. Lisa, Russia is still rejecting calls to pull out from Ukraine as a condition for peace talks. A Ukrainian official says his country's battle losses have added up to 13,000 troops so far, 13,000 and counting.
Senseless, completely senseless, right, Hal? And we don't know where the end will be, where the finish line is for Putin even. I mean, if he's not willing to look at, some sort of compromise or ceasefire or an end to all of this, if he's not willing to do that, then what is the finish line for him? When will he declare his own version of victory so that he can back off and, end this war once and for all? And here we have maybe some sort of prospects for the international community to intervene and end this senseless war. But of course, Putin is not on board.
Lisa, closer to home, Border Patrol agents made a historic liquid fentanyl seizure in South Texas. And we're talking about enough fentanyl to kill over 5.5 million people?
It's horrific, right? Each day we hear about more and more fentanyl being seized at the border. This time, liquid fentanyl, Hal. That means easier to absorb and more easily spread, right? So what are they going to do with this? Put it in drinks like roofies, or put it in different ways where young people will have access to it and die because they do not have any control of this substance or what it can do or how lethal it is. Another reason why the border is so dangerous right now. And as we talked about last week, reports about this also trickling into Canada. So the risk is for all of us in the Northern Hemisphere to truly keep an eye on the borders. There's no way to vet what's coming in, how quickly people are coming in, the sheer number of people coming in, and of course, the substances that they're able to bring in with them. So, buyer beware. This is, how many stories like this do we need, or how many stories do we need of innocent suburban teens and preteens just experimenting with drugs for the first time and dying of overdose because of fentanyl? So again, I don't know what it's going to take. The Border Patrol agents are complaining. Everyone is complaining, but there's no true leadership from the top down to put an end to this.
Now, the Biden administration says it may revive Trump-era border policies. Biden says he wants to make it more difficult to seek asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border. Tell me more about that.
Well, it'll be too late to have them not seek asylum at the border. The point is not to have this lax policy in order for them to get up and get going, right? So they're not from Mexico, and that's what a lot of people don't understand is they're coming from countries that are further south, so Honduras, Guatemala, and others, El Salvador. So by the time they get to Mexico, they've already made up their mind and packed up their lives. So there's something that needs to be done, whether they remain in Mexico, which has not been as much of an option because Mexico is trying to worry about its absorption of migrants, and then trying to get into the United States, where if we're not providing them with the asylum, well, they'll do other things to get in illegally. So there has to be more that's done in terms of a posture, in terms of a stance that tells these migrants that it's not going to happen the way that they believed it was going to happen for the last 2.5 years. So more has to be done. And of course, reverting to the Trump era policies means taking a stance like Donald Trump that is more firm against, in defending our borders. He talked about a wall for a reason, not because he's a horrific, horrible human being who doesn't want to let people into the United States, but it's because he wanted to keep the borders safe. And now, of course, many of the states on the border, including Arizona and Texas, are talking about completing the portions of the border wall themselves because of this crisis. Again, in theory, a lot of these policies seem humane, but in practice, they're inhumane. When you see people getting raped at the border, when you see the drugs that are coming in, when you see people drowning because of the risks that they have to take to get over, it's not a humane policy whatsoever. So perhaps all of these things will give a signal to the Biden administration to have a much more stringent stance on immigration and on the border so that they won't have these issues going forward.
Now, Lisa, speaking of migrants, there are reports that 273,000 Americans allegedly moved to Canada in 2022. What are your thoughts on that? Over 250,000 people.
Right. Well, they came a little late, right? I thought those would be the ones who swore they would move to Canada after Trump was elected, but perhaps they postponed their move. But it doesn't surprise me. We're seeing a lot of people looking around at the realities of life. We're seeing a lot of moves to red states like Florida, like Texas, Nevada, Arizona, and those states are kind of leaning blue at this point. But of course, those are states that are traditionally red and have policies that are red, and no state income tax, and so on. So it doesn't surprise me that people want to pick up and start new. And Canada, of course, being a new country, of course, new opportunities, and people move all over the place. So it's not surprising that we're seeing these kinds of numbers.
So, Lisa, when are you moving north? Remember, the mountains are calling your name.
Yeah, I love Canada. I would love to live there.
U.S. correspondent and foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, and she's one of our regulars. Thanks so much for joining us today from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.
Our country appears more divided now than ever. Many would attribute that to a number of policies that Trudeau Liberals are bringing forth, including Bill C-11, which many would agree is about censorship, Bill C-69, the bill that former Alberta Premier referred to as the No More Pipelines Act, which has been enforced, and Bill C-21 now, which many would argue is an attack on our farmers and ranchers, since it threatens even stiffer gun controls to take away the right to own a number of rifles, including a shotgun. Now, to talk about these bills in more detail, and to talk a bit about the political landscape is Medicine Hat Cardston Warner MP Glenn Motz. Glenn is joining us from our nation's capital in Ottawa. Glenn, welcome to Bridge City News.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here and join you.
Now, Glenn, before we chat about some of the bills, let's discuss what we just witnessed in Ottawa during the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act. What are your thoughts on what you heard?
Well, I don't know if you're aware, I also am the vice chair of the Special Joint Committee on the Invocation of the Emergencies Act, made up of parliamentarians, members of parliament, and senators. And so we are going through a similar process with a different focus than what the commission did. It is troubling at the very end that the narrative changed, that the government all of a sudden broadened the scope of their definition of a national security emergency. Unlike what the Act actually says they were required to do. The Act says you have to follow Section 2 of the CSIS Act that lays out what a national security, a threat to national security really is. It would appear as if they didn't like that definition because it didn't meet their narrative, right? And so they had to turn around and create their own, but they wouldn't release that. The intelligence advisor to a national security advisor, to the prime minister, wouldn't release it, wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't give any details. Justice Minister Lametti didn't give any details, and the prime minister. They all skated the issue. That's not transparency, and that's not what Canadians are expecting from our committee, nor from the Royal Commission or the Commission, the Rillieux Commission.
Now, Glenn, with your background in policing, was there any testimony that maybe surprised you a little bit?
Yes, I think we had an expectation that there's more coordination in with policing and police operations between the Ottawa Police Service, the Ontario Provincial Police, and the RCMP. They had a plan in place. Unfortunately, the government didn't use it. But I think the most important telling issue is the government kept asking city officials and police officials to continue to have discussions and conversations with protest organizers, but they themselves would not. And that to me is incredibly telling on this government's divisive tactics. The reality is, people came to Ottawa to protest what they felt were inappropriate mandates from COVID, how it was impacting their life, and they wanted government to hear them. And so, I even tried to facilitate meetings between Tamara Lich, the main organizer that put this together, and a couple of government ministers, specifically Minister Mendocino of Public Safety and Al Gabra of Transportation. And after a couple of days of going back and forth, they refused. They just said, it wasn't going to happen. And so, the organizers were prepared to have a meeting and then, have their people leave. The government wasn't interested. Since when does the government not listen to their people just because they may not like the position of the people who are there? And it was incredibly divisive. We have a prime minister calling people who have a different view than him racists, misogynists. Those people. That is completely inappropriate for anybody. But then again, for the leader of our country, for our prime minister to have that attitude, it should give people pause moving forward.
So, Glenn, do you think we may see Justin Trudeau be asked to resign if Justice Rouleau determines that there is no reason for the federal government to invoke the Emergencies Act?
Well, the unfortunate, I think, believe reality of the legislation and the fact that they invoked it wouldn't be that there wouldn't be any. I don't believe there'd be any sanctions against Trudeau himself or the Liberal government. What there will be, though, coming from our committee for sure, and I'm sure from the Rouleau Commission, is recommendations that, and I'm sure, on many things, but I'm hopeful that one of those recommendations will be that no government moving forward will ever use the Emergencies Act in this circumstance ever again.
Let's move on to the carbon tax here for a moment now. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has blasted the Liberals about tripling the carbon tax. And Glenn, let's talk about the timing right now. So many families across the country, including here in Alberta, are hurting with a high cost of living with inflation. You talk to a lot of MPs. What sense are you getting from them as well? Is this just bad timing with increasing the carbon tax?
Well, the carbon tax doesn't work, first of all. I mean, the Liberal government has not met one environmental climate target that they've ever set for themselves. So it's evident that the carbon tax is not a tool to improve the environment. It's a tax. And so, I mean, we oppose it. We oppose it straight across the board. I've never supported the carbon tax, and I never will support the carbon tax because it does not work. But to continue to go down this path of increases on the carbon tax on top of all the other cost of living and inflationary costs going on means the government is tone deaf. They're pushing an ideology that has little to do with common sense, little to do with the environment. That is trying to keep pace with maybe other global leaders or a position globally that they think is going to put them in good stead. It's not working. It's harming Canadians. It's not helping our environment, and it adds insult to injury for those who are already struggling to make ends meet straight across the board, whether it be food, groceries, gasoline, whatever it is. It's costing everybody more. Heating our homes. Farmers. Like it is having a dramatic impact on people's way of life and our ability to manage with the limited resources that we all have.
Now, speaking of farmers, we were chatting with Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas about having the carbon tax being removed from agricultural fuel to be a real benefit to our producers and our farmers. Apparently passed committee. What's the latest with that right now? Making its way now to Parliament Hill to be debated?
Yes, it's. I believe it's gone through. I don't know what stage it's at. I don't recall offhand, but I do know that that's a bill that was put forward by my conservative colleagues. We certainly support it. I don't know what stage, whether it's at third reading or in committee or already sent to the Senate. I'm not sure. I apologize for that. But it is, something on that's incredibly necessary that we remove the tax on grain drying, for example. Because those are, some of our producers incur tens of thousands of dollars just in the carbon tax alone. If they're taking their grain off when it's a little tough, and so that's the moisture levels are too high. That's unacceptable. What does that do? Then it limits their ability to make ends meet and reduces their bottom line, their margins. Then at the end of the day, food prices continually go up as a result.
And heating barns, we can't forget about that, especially as the mercury plummets as we get closer to the winter months here. Now, Glenn, let's start outside of the carbon tax. What other tax breaks do you think that the Trudeau Liberals should be giving us right now? What are the Conservatives pushing?
Well, I think there's a number of things. One, January 1, a month from now, there's a payroll taxes increasing. All employers are required to increase payroll taxes on CPP and employment insurance. As a result, they've been through a lot of turmoil already as small businesses. They employ the majority of people in this country, and to burden them even more and to burden our employees even more by paying more tax is because, again, completely tone deaf to the circumstance where we're at. We should be, eliminating the carbon tax altogether. The Liberals proposed a GST rebate, which is certainly welcome. However, it's a small, it's incredibly small compared to what could be done. And I think, our leader and us as Conservatives have been pushing. Listen, no new taxes. Period. No new taxes at all. And if you're going to have increased spending, if a ministry or one department of government decides to increase their spending, they need to find equivalent savings elsewhere to support it. And I think that's something that we've been pushing. Like, we can't keep borrowing, spending, or creating currency out of bonds that continue to drive up inflation.
Well, even the parliamentary budget officer says he's got a problem with all of the spending the Liberals have been doing. It's been getting out of hand. $20 billion over what they discussed earlier. Glenn, let's talk about Bill C-21 and the amendment to the proposed gun legislation. Legislation that could potentially impact a lot of hunters and farmers because it would basically outlaw shotguns and even .22 caliber rifles.
Well, I want to talk about absolutely, because we're front and center in this now. I sit on the Public Safety Committee as well as the other Emergencies Act Committee, so we're dealing with this as we speak. We had a meeting yesterday afternoon. We'll have another one tomorrow morning. So let's back up. The Liberals proposed C-21 back in the fall of 2021 or in the early spring of 2022. And it was about freezing handguns. It was a handgun freeze. That was generally the bill, and to do some stuff with red flag laws and things like that. It was at committee. We're ready to start amendment, clause by clause amendments to the bill last week. And we get, hundreds of page document that says, here's the Liberal amendments to their own bill. And those amendments included new definitions for a military style assault rifle, and they are including that and to be a prohibited weapon, a prohibited firearm, I should say. And included in that is a definition of what they consider to be a prohibited weapon, prohibited firearm, and that's any firearm that's capable of firing center fire cartridge in a semi-automatic manner that has that the gun's original design could accept a cartridge or magazine that can hold more than 5 rounds. Now, in Canada, holding more than 5 rounds is already a prohibited device. So what the Liberal is saying effectively is, if you have any sort of a rifle or shotgun that is capable of having a magazine that, even though it's only in law in Canada to only have 5, you could put one in that's larger than that, then that's automatically prohibited. But what this legislation does is it targets people that aren't the problem in this country. We've been saying this all along. It targets, the Grandpa Joes who are teaching and passing on a legacy of hunting and sport shooting and those sort of things to their families, to generation after generation after generation. And it misses the mark completely. We have no ability with this legislation to limit what criminals do. And that's the problem. If we want to improve public safety, Conservatives will be front and center with those conversations, but we aren't with this bill. And so that's the issue. We have now attacked, like the Liberals have done all along, they've attacked hunters and farmers with the addition of many hunting rifles and shotguns. And there's even a .22 caliber, which is a rimfire firearm, and they call them, weapons of war. Like, give me a break. These guys don't know what they're doing. They seem to have an agenda that no one understands, and they've offered no idea of how they're actually going to play this out. And that's part of the challenge that we have with this, and we're going to keep fighting it. It is a problem, and we're hearing it loud and clear from across the country. People are tired of the gamesmanship with which the Liberals are doing the dance to their anti-gun lobby.
Now, Glenn, from your experience in law enforcement, what do you think is the key then to limiting gun violence in our country?
There's multiple things we can do to eliminate gun violence. Number one, we need to make sure that we know that violent crime is up in this country. We know that gang homicides are up in this country. We know that people get involved in criminal activity, we need to spend effort and energy in programs that actually work. A friend of mine, Marcel Wilson, runs a 1x1 movement in Toronto, trying to get kids out of gang life and make sure that they don't get into it. That's a preventative measure. Number two, let's focus attention where the tension is. That is on criminals. So people who use firearms in the commission of offense should be held accountable, and should be held more accountable than if no firearm is being used. Then, once they are, if they're charged with an offense and they commit another offense, why are we to let them out on bail? The revolving justice door doesn't work. So Bill C-5 that the government does in their soft on crime approach doesn't work. Bill C-75 that talks about, easier to get out on bail. Then let's focus on illegal firearms. Illegal firearms account for anywhere, depending on the police service, anywhere from 80 to 90%, in that range, of the firearms used that the police have found in firearm offenses. And they are illegal, and they're brought in and they're smuggled in from, generally south of the border. So why aren't we focusing resources on, those sort of task forces that we can eliminate the flow of that? There are porous areas of our border that we need to pay attention to. And, rather than spending $5 or $8 or $10 billion if they compensate for all the firearms they're looking at taking, can you imagine what that actually equates to for keeping people out of gang life, to making sure our justice system is properly resourced, including the law enforcement, focusing where focus needs to be. And that's what Canadians expect from a government, and not making sure that, we have what's been affectionately called a hug-a-thug approach to the justice system.
Glenn, we only have about 30 seconds left here, but I wanted to touch on Bill C-11 that the Liberals seem very set on bringing to pass. What do you think the federal government is hoping to achieve with this new censorship?
I don't know. I quite honestly, I'm disturbed by it, like Canadians all should be. The committee, I don't sit on that committee, but what I've been told, much debate occurred in committee, and people they didn't find anybody who supported it. At the Senate, there was similar discussions going on, but they seem just absolutely head down, pushing ahead with something. There's got to be more that we're missing, but we can see by this government, they're not a government for the people. They're a government of the people, and that's they want to be in charge and they want to control their people, and that's just wrong in a democracy.
Glenn Montz, Conservative MP for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner, thanks so much for joining us today from our nation's capital.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.